Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you very much, Francine, for those wonderful opening remarks. That's way more respect than I get around the house. All that stuff from your CV, it doesn't count for much if you haven't cut the grass yet. Once a year, the Bank of Canada board meets in and outside of Ottawa. We choose a location where we can have our meetings and interact more with the local community. It gives us a tremendous opportunity to feel the pulse of a specific region and meet with local leaders. So let me just take a moment to introduce to you Phil Deck and Claire Kennedy, who are here at the head table. They're both our board members for Ontario, and they are both based in Toronto. And they've given us a great show, really good meetings and side activities. So it's my good fortune that this meeting and my first public speech as governor is taking place here in the heart of southern Ontario, especially as we're just down the road from my hometown of Oshawa. So this region is an historic center of Canadian industry and commerce, and it is home to some of Canada's most storied businesses and prestigious centers of learning. Many of the firms that made this region and Canada strong were on the front lines as the global financial crisis pushed the Canadian economy into recession. And as our economy continues to expand, it will be the performance of the business sector here and across Canada over the coming while that we will be watching with great interest. And that, of course, is because what happens to business in Canada matters very much for the Bank of Canada. Not just because we care, which we do, okay, but in order for us to do our job properly, in order for us to promote the economic and financial welfare of Canadians, we need to understand all the dynamics that feed into the Canadian economy. Now, as you know, the bank aims to keep inflation low, stable, and predictable. Our flexible inflation targeting framework is the best contribution that monetary policy can make so that Canadian households, people like you, and businesses can make decisions about their financial futures with confidence. C'est important de noter que la Banque a pour objectif de maintenir l'inflation à un niveau bas, stable et prévisible. Son régime flexible de ciblage d'inflation constitue la meilleure contribution que peut apporter la politique monétaire. Cela permet aux ménages et aux entreprises du pays de prendre en toute confiance les décisions qui détermineront leur avenir sur le plan financier. Now, over the past couple of decades, the average rate of inflation has been very close to our 2% target. We're very proud of that. Even during the global economic and financial crisis, our commitment didn't waver. And the inflation target is sacrosanct to us and has become a credible anchor for the inflation expectations of Canadians. And moreover, this target is symmetrical. We care just as much about inflation falling below as we do about it rising above the target. When inflation falls below the target and interest rates are correspondingly low, there's little room for conventional monetary policy to respond to negative shocks. And when inflation is above target, the erosion of purchasing power becomes significant. And uncertainty about future prices makes it hard for households and businesses to make good financial decisions. Furthermore, this framework has built-in flexibility with respect to the amount of time it takes to return inflation to the target after a shock. Years of successful inflation targeting have given the bank the credibility to use this flexibility during periods of economic stress. A flexible exchange rate is central to achieving our inflation targets over time. Now, the recent turmoil showed us the value of this credibility that we've earned. Like others, to address the stresses of the crisis, we put the flexibility of our regime to work. Nonetheless, throughout the recession and since, the inflation expectations of Canadians have remained well anchored at this target, and that proves to us that our framework is secure and that it's working. This past downturn was different. It was different from previous recessions significantly. Even though Canada performed better than our G7 peers, the so-called Great Recession put many companies out of business, especially small and exporting firms. Now, many of those that survived dramatically reduced their operations, shuttering plants and dismantling equipment. Now, these actions hurt badly in terms of job losses and, of course, lost output. Now, while both jobs and output have recovered, in fact, they now surpass their pre-recession peaks here in Canada, the structural damage caused by the crisis lingers. Indeed, our recovery so far has been primarily driven by higher household spending, while exports have lagged behind. Now, rather than a recovery in the usual sense, this looks to me more like a post-war reconstruction. Or, if you'll allow me to slide into a more academic language just for a moment, I refer to the Schumpeterian process, which you may have heard of as creative destruction. We've certainly had the destruction. But the creation side of the Schumpeterian equation has been delayed by numerous unusual risks, heightened uncertainty, and therefore a lack of confidence. So this is mainly what I want to talk about today. I want to discuss the impact of the crisis on Canadian business and how the firms that have survived have changed and are responding. And we need business confidence to continue to heal. And this matters very much to the Bank of Canada. Il y a plusieurs aspects sur lesquels je veux insister. Je veux vous parler des répercussions de la crise sur les entreprises canadiennes, comment celles qui ont survécu ont changé et comment elles s'ajustent. La confiance des entreprises doit continuer de se rétablir. C'est très important aux yeux de la Banque du Canada. Now, our understanding of such issues will be a key part of the rigorous distillation of information that drives our policy decisions. As part of that process, we meet as a team, we talk, we argue, and we do our best to understand the significant forces driving the economy. And with our next policy decision coming on the 17th of July, we are now at the early stage of this round of deliberations. Standard macroeconomic models can only go so far in capturing today's dynamics, and especially when uncertainty is greater than normal. It's important to supplement the models with insights directly from business. Now, my messages today will be relevant for companies across Canada, but they resonate particularly in this region. As a native of Oshawa, I understand that very well. Now, I've seen the impact of the crisis and the recession on the auto sector in particular in my hometown. And I've heard about it from the manufacturers and exporters in this region. And the bank has heard about it from the financial community on Bay Street and from all types of business leaders in Southern Ontario who participate in the bank's quarterly business outlook surveys, the BOSS, we call it. I probably don't need to tell anybody in this room that the recent global recession was the worst downturn experienced since the Great Depression. In very short order, global GDP fell more than 3%, and millions upon millions of jobs were lost. Here in Canada, 432,000 jobs were lost, and GDP fell by 4.2%. The unemployment rate spiked to 8.7%. The severity of the global economic and financial crisis delivered a direct, sharp blow to Canadian business. Canada experienced a particularly deep contraction in investment and in exports. The trauma was severe and long-lasting. Its impact was felt by businesses across the country, businesses saw their markets dwindle and their balance sheets deteriorate. In a typical downturn that lasts, say, 6 or 9 months, a bank will likely let its client ride out the recession. But in a prolonged crisis, the story is a lot more complex. Credit can be very difficult to find. Anecdotally, we know that during the crisis, otherwise solvent and creditworthy firms were left with less credit than they needed. In too many cases, temporary plant shutdowns were not sufficient to match the fall in demand or the decline in financing. Some firms outright reduced their operations, and others simply closed their doors. Let's look at a few facts. During a normal growth period in Canada, there is a steady increase in the number of businesses in operation. In short, creative destruction results in the net creation of new firms. But since the onset of the recession, there has been limited net creation of businesses. Canada's exporters have been particularly hard hit. The group most profoundly affected has been manufacturing exporters, whose ranks have continued to shrink. C'est-à-dire que depuis le début de la récession, la création nette d'entreprises au Canada a été limitée. En particulier, le choc a été très rude pour les exportateurs canadiens. Le groupe le plus gravement touché parmi eux est celui des manufactures. Le nombre de ces entreprises n'a cessé de décroître. Now, Canada is not alone in this regard. In the United States, the dynamics were very similar, but even more dramatic. The net number of new businesses fell for 3 years in a row until 2011 in the United States, when finally the trend began to turn around. So perhaps it should be no surprise, given the decline in global demand, the drop in the number of American companies to trade with, and the related drop in the number of Canadian exporters, that Canada's export sector has lagged. In fact, exports are the only component of Canada's GDP that remain below the pre-recession peak. Our annual exports today are more than $100 billion lower than would be typical at this point in the recovery cycle. Now, regaining the lost output of companies that have disappeared or downsized will require that existing firms boost their production, that they invest to expand their capacity, and that the net creation of new firms resumes a higher growth path. Now, the good news is that the balance sheets of corporate Canada are healthy, and the capacity to invest already exists. Now, we could see that the recession was causing a significant structural change in the Canadian economy as it unfolded. The bank acknowledged that this destruction of potential output was happening in its quarterly monetary policy report in April of 2009. Reflecting its best judgment, the bank reduced its estimates of potential growth in each of the years, 2009 to 2011 at that time. Nonetheless, here in Canada, we were relatively fortunate. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, stimulative monetary and fiscal policies proved highly effective in maintaining domestic demand, particularly household expenditures. Household spending was supported by strong growth of borrowing, which resulted in record high debt-to-income levels. Now, given the circumstances, it was a good thing that households had the capacity to expand their spending. This provided a very necessary cushion from the worst effects of the global contraction. Now, the bank has been very careful to remind people that interest rates will rise at some point. We've urged homeowners and other borrowers to do the arithmetic, ensure that they will be able to manage their debts at more normal interest rate levels. And I'm confident that this is exactly what people are doing. Now, this growth model that we've been following has been effective, but obviously its limits are clear. In fact, while recent data are choppy, we continue to see a constructive evolution of activity in the housing sector. But what needs to happen next is for export momentum to build and business investment to recover, while the household sector settles into a more balanced and sustainable growth path. For all this to happen, will require the rebuilding of Canada's economic potential. And that is what makes this recovery cycle so unique. Autrement dit, il faut maintenant que les exportations prennent de la vigueur et que les entreprises se remettent à investir. Dans le même temps, le secteur des ménages adoptera une trajectoire d'expansion plus équilibrée et durable. Pour que tout cela se produise, il faudra rebâtir le potentiel économique du Canada. C'est ce qui rend unique ce cycle de reprise. So let me use some case studies to illustrate this idea. The structural transformation of the auto sector has been dramatic. The 70% decline in production from peak to trough, that was brutal. Machinery was boxed up and sent overseas. Plants closed. These are very hard times for this sector and those who make their living from it. The crisis in the auto sector prompted the federal government to step in with extraordinary financial support. That support helped save thousands of jobs throughout southern Ontario. And the firms that survived in the process have lowered their cost structures. We're seeing more innovative processes and accelerated new product development. And these elements improve the competitiveness of Canadian firms and position them well to go head-to-head with U.S. and global parts sector firms. They also help Canada to gain a foothold in global supply chains. So the recovery of auto sales in the U.S. is clearly underway, and that's the first essential ingredient. But it remains still to be seen how the reconstruction process that I've discussed will play out for this important sector. Now, I could tell a similar story about Canada's forestry sector, which, like the auto sector, is much smaller than before. In 2012, the Canadian forestry industry accounted for about 1.2% of Canada's total GDP, down from 1.6% in 2007. Well, during that period, almost 60,000 workers, about 20% of the forestry workforce, were displaced. Here, too, the recovery in U.S. housing and the building of new relationships in faster-growing markets, such as China, are contributing to improved confidence for the sector. I can describe similar stories to these for other sectors, including ICT, information communication technology, biotechnology. These are all stories that we'll need to keep watching. But from the frequent conversations that the bank has with business leaders, we know that the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in Canada. Some of the decline in exports reflects the ingenuity of Canadian firms, including firms in this region, in effect, in responding to the U.S. slowdown by pivoting their products and marketing to the faster-growing segments of the Canadian economy. Others became more competitive through restructuring or by finding a niche adjacent to their traditional market. Now, such insights feed importantly into the bank's understanding of the workings of the Canadian economy and thus into the policy deliberations of the bank. And I strongly believe that, especially in these unusual times, as we work to understand the undercurrents of the recovery, this kind of dialogue with the private sector is critical. To realize the economic growth that Canada is looking for, a return to self-sustaining, self-generating growth, we need to see the rebuilding of our capacity through both the expansion of existing companies and, importantly, in the creation of new ones. This will require growing confidence among existing businesses and entrepreneurs. The gathering momentum in foreign demand, especially in the United States, should help lift the confidence of Canada's exporters. This is critical for Canadian firms to boost their investment to expand their productive capacity. The sequence, therefore, that we can anticipate is the following. Foreign demand will continue to build. Our exports will strengthen further. Confidence will improve. Existing companies will have the confidence to expand, and companies will invest to increase their capacity, and brand new ones will be created. And the sequence may already be underway. Permettez-moi d'insister. Voici la séquence que nous pouvons entrevoir. La demande étrangère va reprendre. Nos exportations vont progresser davantage. La confiance va s'améliorer. et les entreprises existantes vont prendre de l'expansion. Les firmes vont investir pour augmenter leur capacité et de nouvelles sociétés vont être créées. Ce processus est peut-être déjà amorcé. To conclude, in monetary policy, actions are critically important. The bank is absolutely committed, as I mentioned earlier, to keeping inflation predictable, stable, on target, so firms can make longer-term decisions in an environment of confidence. But words, too, matter a great deal. By explaining the cross-currents at work in our economy, our projections for what's ahead, and our monetary policy response, we can help to heal business confidence. And in order to expand our understanding of what's happening in the real economy, we listen to businesses, to labor groups, and to industry associations. Beneath our economic and financial statistics and analysis are real people making real decisions. And those decisions are hard to make anytime. But when uncertainty is high and confidence is low, they can be even more difficult. Now, I'm optimistic that the signs are there, that the process is underway. And right now, what we need most is stability and patience. And to help nurture confidence, an active engagement with Canadians must remain a cornerstone of the policy of the Bank of Canada. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Je suis impatient de vous écouter et de répondre à vos questions. So thank you very, very much for being here today. I'm keen to hear your views, and I would be pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
We do have some questions, but before we get started with the questions, Governor, thank you very much, but I suggest that you call home and tell them you're going to be late for dinner. We have a lot of questions.
Oh, my God. Did anybody ask where I get my hair cut? Because that's what I hope. Because I'm ready for that one.
You have no idea the questions that were bandied around. Maybe we'll save some of those for later. John's face is going into complete panic there. No, but
okay.
a lot of the questions obviously pertain to interest rate.
Oh.
So let's just, I know. Let's start with the worst, and we get to the fun ones later. How's that?
Okay.
The interest rate, what's
well,
happening?
that's the question.
Yeah, what's happening? Okay. Here, wait a minute.
Okay.
It comes in 100 different formats.
You have no idea how easy it is to answer that question because
okay.
we don't talk about interest rates except when we have a fixed announcement date.
So we don't talk
July
about
the 17th. Stay tuned. And we're going to think about it really hard between now and then.
Okay. Okay. Ready for you now.
Okay.
I'm ready for you now. Now we're going to ask the real questions. Okay, now. So how do you feel about anticipating, communicating this message to the market? What will we need to read between the lines? And what is the question? How does Mr. Poloz anticipate communicating his message, your message? How do you anticipate doing that to the market so that they hear?
Okay. Well, every way possible. This I think, is the best way. Except maybe one-on-one is even better.
Yes.
But you know, the thing is that what we need to do is use every channel that we have because it's important that everybody understand what we're up to and not be guessing. That's the important thing. If people are guessing, then that's when you get an unusual response to markets when we do things. So.
Do you feel that incredible pressure now since there's so much focus on the work you do? We were talking at the table earlier about how, 20 years ago, how many Canadians or how much of the world knew what the Bank of Canada was doing. Yeah. Does that just increase the profile? Is wonderful, but does that increase the pressure?
I think the pressure comes from the fact that we are in a highly unusual situation, right, and that we are actually in uncharted territory. And so the pressure is to be able to find your way in a positive direction. And I think the key to doing that is to consult a lot. So because the models that we use aren't really equipped to deal with the situation we find ourselves in. Even though we have model fails us time after time after time after time, and then we use the model and we say, oh, 2.8. I think that's kind of not right. So the zone of uncertainty is so much bigger. The only way to close it in is to talk to real people about what's actually happening.
And I find in business often when you consult consultants, they're wonderful because then you can blame them if they're wrong.
And that's exactly right.
Right. So now, what do you see is the biggest risk to our Canadian economy right now?
The biggest risk that we face today, I suppose, still is an external one, which is that the world may not recover with the same kind of vigor that at the moment we're hoping for and actually seeing signs of. We, of course, still have problems in Europe. Okay, that could be a long-playing story. Out in Japan, we've got a new monetary experiment happening, and it's got us feeling more optimistic, and we're feeling reasonably optimistic. In fact, more every day, more reassured by what's happening in the U.S. So right now, we're thinking, yeah, the glass is half full, and up we go. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't have a surprise, like we've had before. So to me, the risk is that's not all self-sustaining yet. It's more of a fragile recovery.
Right. And it's that we feel, many Canadians, I think, feel like we're in a bubble right now, this protected bubble, and compared to so many other countries in the world.
The Canadian bubble. You mean like we're...
not the Oakville bubble. No. That's another bubble. That's another bubble. I don't know if you heard about that bubble, but there's, yes. No.
But you're talking about sort of a too relaxed bubble.
Well, do you feel Canadians aren't feeling relaxed, but they have, when you look at, when you look at the world economies, Canada has fared so much better. It has hurt, but it's fared so much better. Do you feel that Canadians are concerned that that just isn't going to be the case for?
Not in my conversations with companies. It's true that we did much better than the rest of the world. We have some really strong reasons for that. A great banking sector stood there with their companies, got things done, with no fear of any issues at all with the banking system. Other countries didn't have that. So we had that, and so when we look beyond that, though, you talk to companies, and they're not sitting on their laurels. They don't think, oh, well, we're protected. Because they're talking to their customers every day, and their customers are driving a hard bargain or saying, I'm thinking about switching to somebody else or whatever. So they've got to compete every day, re-earn the business every day. So I don't see anybody relaxing in corporate Canada.
And how do we get corporate Canada to loosen up their purse strings and invest more money? What do we do? What can we do? And what can we do as Canadians to help our economy? The spending part I heard earlier, I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's easy.
Well, yeah. I think that corporate Canada, like the rest of us, are unsure about the future. And so when you're putting serious money on the line, you want to be reasonably sure. You're never 100% sure. So that's what I meant by growing the confidence levels. I think when we're sure that Europe is managing its problems and that Japan is on a faster track and the U.S. is clearly self-sustaining, people are going to invest because they're going to need the capacity in order to meet the orders. But until it's more real, I would be hesitant too. It's real money, and if it falters, you're just going to make a mess, right? So I think you've got to be patient as that healing process occurs.
As a healing process, of course, but we don't want it to become a self-fulfilling prophecy either, that if we don't invest, then we will see the outcome that we fear the most. Oh. Is that a consideration?
No, but like Canada is nowhere without its foreign customers. So that's, that we've already done that. So what we need now is to go to the next leg, and that does require that our foreign customers, gather momentum as we see in our forecast, and that then the companies, when they see that they will respond. That's just Mother Nature at work.
Now, if you can tell us all and tell us Canadians, what would you like us to do so that we can help you do your job?
Well, gosh, I don't know. Eat in restaurants more?
It's the only answer I was looking for. That's fine.
Work hard, boost your productivity, make the bottom line stronger. That's what everybody's doing. And eat out more.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for playing this little game with us. And we can have these all printed up for you. And
that'd be great.
Yes. nighttime reading.
Are you sure nobody asked where I get my hair cut?
All right. Where did you get your hair cut? No, you're not going to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I want to invite Michael LeBlanc up. Yeah. Come on up, Michael.
And on behalf of all of the citizens of the country of Canada, I have to tell you that today is, you've heard many times about, this is a special event, lots of people here. In fact, the easiest and simplest way to catalog it is to simply say, you know, we're honored that you've chosen Oakville and this chamber as your first place to do a public address. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think the other thing, just while we're looking to give you a little token, I wanted to mention is, and we've heard in the press many times that, you know, you've been described as the smartest guy in the room.
Not this room.
I don't know. That's the way you've been described. And then in the past, with Governor Carney, we've heard that he was probably the best governor of the Bank of Canada we ever had. Mm-hmm. The question is, have you and he ever been in the same room together? In any event, I want to take this opportunity to again thank you for doing this today. And you're welcome to Oakville anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You should say what it is when you got the list.